Okay, we were experiencing some technical difficulties there, but I think we're back now. I was saying, in addition to Synecdoche, New York, and I'm thinking of ending things, there's another film that I think is closely related by Aronofsky. It's called Mother with an exclamation point after Mother. And it is also described as a psychological horror film. Um, and I'm actually encouraged that films like this are achieving, mainstream success to some extent. Or maybe I should be discouraged. Maybe it's better that films like this are kind of underground and not not embraced by the mainstream, because then
Well, the mainstream
they kind
certainly
of,
didn't embrace this movie.
well, I mean, Roger Ebert praised the shit out of it.
Sure,
That's pretty
critics
mainstream.
liked it.
Yeah,
Critics liked
well,
it.
okay, but that doesn't necessarily translate to box office success. But there is kind of a, when critics like something, it often means that it's been accepted,
I agree, but it
as
seems
it
like
were.
from my reading around this film that this is a example where the two were definitely in conflict. That it did very poorly in the
Hmm.
box office.
Yeah, but it was a critical favorite.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, if the critics accept it, then that's a form of acceptance
sure,
too.
sure. I get your point. I get your point.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it's an interesting phenomenon that films like this are kind of. I mean, I'm thinking of ending things that was like popular on Netflix. It's kind of surprising that a film that complex and dark and just weird, uncanny, strange
Hmm.
it's surreal. It's like uh, that's interesting, good in some ways and problematic in other ways, but encouraging for me because you know I a novel that I'm working on is very much in this vein. It's like psychological horror. That would be a good way to describe it, and a surreal kind of. It will be a surreal kind of narrative. Dreams are very important. So I don't know. I like that
Cool.
in some
Yeah,
ways.
sure. Do you want to further speak about the character, especially about anything that I said? Like, do you like him?
Um, well, I found myself being annoyed by his hypochondria because I want him to snap out of it. You
But
know.
forgetting the hypochondria, more just this obsession with death and what I brought up earlier, which is like this kind of claim, this pretentious claim that his masterpiece is going to speak the brutal truth, and that the brutal truth is, according to him, a dark truth. Maybe I'm wrong about that,
I don't
but
know that he even says that. I mean, I think that's just
well, then why do
his.
the thing with the post-it notes?
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, that's one aspect of the brutal truth, but that doesn't mean that's the brutal truth in its entirety
But he's really
necessarily.
like he's imposing his own anxieties and suffering on everyone else. I mean,
Well,
I think
that's what an author or auteur does, right? It's an authority.
but here's the quote. He says, "I'm not excusing myself from this either. I will have someone play me to delve into the murky, cowardly depths of my lonely, fucked up being. And he'll get notes too, and those notes will correspond to the notes I truly receive every day from my God." That was kind of weird too. Like, my God, I don't know what he meant by that, but It's just like,
Well, you mentioned Beckett earlier. This reminds me of a very short Beckett play called Catastrophe, uh, wherein the director of this theatrical performance is kind of, to me, Beckett is saying like the director, or by extension, the author of any work is a kind of tyrant, at least with respect to his or her aesthetic vision. So I found this humorous. I didn't take it as literally and seriously as you did.
yeah.
As I said, I was laughing throughout. There are many, many hilarious moments, and I would replay them. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. The dialogue is so outrageous at times that it's very amusing. Let me just find some examples here of my favorites. I mean, we mentioned some of them, but there's like there's like the group therapy session, right? I don't. Maybe it's couples counseling. It's like Caden and the wife, played
Adele.
by Catherine Keener, Adele, right? And then the hot therapist that he can't stop looking at. He has like a weird foot and leg fetish. Well, not weird actually, but it's quite pronounced.
Really,
It's
that's
like
interesting that you
shot.
interpreted it that way, because I felt it was more like she was constantly thrusting her physical self onto him. I didn't see him being particularly interested.
Well,
But
why
maybe
it's from his point of view. We get that zoom in on her painted red toenails. In those I don't know what she was wearing, wedges or something.
she was ridiculous.
And so during one of those sessions, I think Adele says, "Can I say something awful?" And then the therapist says, "Yes, please do." And then later, well, I guess it's part of that same scene. Like she says something completely humiliating to
That she
Caden.
wishes he had died, basically.
Right, there you go. That's what it was. And then the therapist is like, "Does that make you feel awful?" And he says, "Yes." And she says, "Good." I mean, it's so outrageous. Like the scene with the daughter as she's dying. She
That's great.
forces him to admit that he left
Falsely
her.
admit.
Yeah, falsely admit, of course. This girl has been completely brainwashed. And that is one of the most horrific things, right? Like the girl using that translation device, she's speaking in German and it's translating it into English. She says, "Oh yes, I can't even remember the woman, Maria, was it? The Jennifer Jason Leigh character.
Yeah, Maria.
Right? Yeah, Maria. She's like, "Oh yes, she introduced me to my vagina and hers." So it's like, what kind of fucked up nonsense is this? Like the mom allowed this other woman to groom her daughter like from age 4 or 5,
I didn't realize it was that young, but yeah.
Well, that's when. How old was she when she abducted her? Well, I mean, took her to where? Berlin, was it?
Berlin.
Yeah, they went to Berlin. How old was she? I mean, in the beginning, she's I don't know, maybe she's older than 4, but she's younger than 10, and she
gets the full body tattoo at I think 10.
Yeah, so that that's already starting. Well, she's definitely prepubescent. Let's put it that way. And the mom allows this other woman to like raise her as her, I don't know, companion, but much more than that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, she's implanting false memories in her own kid. That's like the most outrageous form of psychological abuse. So if we're talking about horrible characters, I mean, however distasteful Caden may be, to me, she's far more despicable.
It's interesting because in some of the analysis that
touched on a personal nerve, I guess you could say.
Okay, it's interesting just because some of the analysis that I watched about the film was keen to stress how she was the more redeemable character in many ways because, for example, in the beginning, she doesn't get too alarmed by the daughter's green stool. She's not so anxious about stuff the way that the Philip Seymour Hoffman character is, right? She's just able to kind of take things in stride.
You almost said Kaufman there. Interesting.
She seems to enjoy life, and I even read a quote from Kaufman about the film where he says that
Kaufman or Hoffman?
Kaufman.
Okay.
In which he agrees that she's more successful in a way as an artist because obviously her paintings are insanely small, but his point is that she is able to realize her art in a way that is practical in some way, whereas Hoffman bites off more than he can chew, and that ultimately makes him unsuccessful.
But see, I like that. It's a glorious failure. I like these epic ambitions that crash and burn, So I admire that. But speaking about the wife, don't forget, as Sammy Bar Nathan says, this stalker guy that that we find out later has been following Caden around so he can play him. Or maybe that wasn't the purpose originally, but that's ultimately what happens. As he says about Adele, he says, "Oh yes, she's the most brilliant artist of our time. No one has had the courage to express what she's expressed." And then he pauses for a beat and says, "Sweet pussy too."
Yeah. As I reflect now, because I was hoping that this discussion would kind of make me rethink the movie. And I think if I had gone into it, first of all, it probably is worth a second watch. And that's what a lot of critics insist. That's what Maria suggested when we mentioned that we're doing the next episode about this film. But I think if I'd gone in thinking this is a horror movie, and I'm going to then, rather than something that maybe is more philosophical and is going to have some kind of real, I know that people would argue that it has that as well, but I just think I might have enjoyed it more, or I might have approached it with a different expectation. So I don't know. That's just something I'm thinking real time. Do we want to talk about death at all? In terms of, I don't know, is it an issue for you? Maybe that's too personal anyway, but, in medieval times, religious artists and thinkers popularized the phrase memento mori under the belief that mindfulness of our own death inspired us to live better, more meaningful lives. Do you think death is something that we should...
Memento mori is the flip side of carpe diem.
What do you mean when you say the flip side?
I mean, basically what you're saying, consciousness or remembrance of one's death, encourages one or causes one to seize the day, to live.
Right, so they go in tandem.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I wasn't sure if you were saying it's like
they're two sides of the same coin, you could say.
Right.
You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, and I wonder if Kaufman would argue that death should play a larger role in our consciousness, or is that just something that he or his character is fascinated by? Because for me, it's not really something that I think about much. Besides that
reminds me of an interesting line that I think he mentions this as it's after he's been awarded the MacArthur Genius Grant or whatever, and he starts planning his theatrical piece. He says, theater is the beginning of thought, the truth not yet spoken, and he wants to, this is that brutal truth that he's talking about. It's like in our commodified, vulgarized, sanitized culture, we're not in touch with these realities. Like even death is something that we compartmentalize, and we're not like conscious of it. We try to avoid it. We try to pretty it up. We don't want to deal with the realities of it. And this is I think. It's
but what is the reality
scene.
of it?
I think the same scene is when he's talking about the mikvah. It's called. This is the communal bath, he calls it, of Jewish tradition. He says we're all bathing in this, right? And so it's something that our modern world has lost a sense of community, a kind of connection with the elemental, with death and other heavy issues.
Primordial. Yeah. Sure. I hear you. Shall we discuss Roger Ebert's review a little bit, which I thought was he was obviously very taken by this film, and he called it one of the best films of the decade. Mm-hmm. But he has some kind of choice words that I thought might be fun to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think first of all, he writes this review, which is very unorthodox, and he's quick to acknowledge that in the review itself. And at the end, he kind of tags on a paragraph where he says, I know this is strange, but you already know how I feel about these actors and this director and blah, blah, blah. So he kind of just writes this kind of cute aside at the end. But the paragraph that I thought was really entertaining, where he says, here's how it happens. We find something we want to do if we are lucky, or something we need to do if we are like most people. We use it as a way to obtain food, shelter, clothing, mates, comfort, a first folio of Shakespeare, model airplanes, American Girl dolls, a handful of rice, sex, solitude, a trip to Venice, Nikes, drinking water, plastic surgery, childcare, dogs, medicine, education, cars, spiritual solace, whatever we think we need. To do this, we enact the role we call me, trying to brand ourselves as a person who can and should obtain these things. I'll just get one more paragraph here. In the process, we place the people in our lives into compartments, so that's very similar to what you were just saying, and define how they should behave to our advantage. Because we cannot force them to follow our desires, we deal with projections of them created in our minds, but they will be contrary and have wills of their own. Eventually, new projections of us are dealing with new projections of them. Sometimes versions of ourselves disagree. We succumb to temptation. But, oh, Father, what else was I going to do? I feel like hell. I repent. I'll do it again. Any reaction to that?
This reminds me of that preacher or minister in one of the scenes near the end, right? Like he has that long prayer, and at the end he says, "Fuck everybody, amen."
I couldn't tell in that scene. Is he presumably just performing the script that they've written for him? Because it seems it seems like Caden and Hazel and whoever's there on set are kind of like witnesses to it in real time, rather than seeing someone perform what he is.
Well, that's the thing. We don't know. Is this reality or is this a performance? I mean, I think an underlying theme is that everything is a performance. Even what we think is reality is itself a performance. You know, to use the Shakespearean phrase that you mentioned in our uh, text message thread, all the world's a stage, right? And all the men and women merely players. So I don't concern myself with that. You know, you can't make sense of this. It's a dream logic. You know, this is not like
Right.
this is
Yeah,
not
sure.
supposed to make sense. In
Sure.
a way, it's kind of like a David Lynch movie, although I would say their styles are quite different, but there are some, you know, similarities in the sense that this is not a standard narrative. Certainly not a standard Hollywood narrative. But
I think the performance quality you're raising is like really interesting, you know, because you suddenly make me think like about the fact that I'm kind of performing right now in this podcast,
of course,
and then like how I behave with my wife, where I kind of like I always have this moment where I'm thinking I have like two choices. Like it's like be positive, which isn't fake, but it's like it kind of feels like a performance. Like, and then I have this like darker voice, which is like but the reality is like would be much darker. So, but it's like instead I'm kind of choosing to no, I'm gonna like perform here, but by performing I feel better. You know what I mean?
Well,
It's
so the darker side is what Caden would call the brutal truth, maybe. So
exactly,
so you recognize it. You know it's there. You know he's talking about something that is real and that we all feel at one time or another. You know.
Yeah, but I guess I would just argue that that's not necessarily the truer thing, right? Like it's like if I'm moping around and I'm feeling depressed, but then I have a lesson. Right? Like yesterday I had a lesson and I wasn't really in the mood. I was like, I don't know if I really want to have this lesson. But then I have the lesson and I enjoy the lesson. And the lesson itself is me kind of putting aside the sulkiness, right? A little bit and performing, but that feels good and it doesn't feel like fake. So I guess that's what I'm saying. It's like not the moping and that doesn't have a monopoly on truth. In fact, it seems like from a lot of my experiences with therapy, like they would argue that that's more true is like when you're performing what you want and you're performing your values, that has a lot more credence than when you're ruminating, you know?
Okay, well, I'm gonna.
Sorry if that's like a.
Well, I'm gonna. As you're saying this, I'm thinking I want to push back again on your contention that this is a dark movie. I think in many ways it's a joyous movie. I mean, think of this scene, right? The I won't say reconciliation, but it's like the how could I describe it? It's like when Hazel and Caden finally get it together, you know?
Right.
And they have the perfect day. And then the next day, of course, Hazel dies, right?
Right.
But they had that perfect day, you know? So that's the hope that you're looking for, that you felt was not present in this, but I think very much is, you know? Despite all of the horror, despite all of the death and the decay and the failures, the inability to achieve our ambitions and so on, there is still love, even if just for one day, as Bowie would say, we can be heroes
right, exactly.
just for one day.
And for perfect day, I'm of course thinking of Lou Reed.
There you go.
But
and that perfect day lives forever, you know, in a sense.
No,
it doesn't. And yet it does, you know? It's both and. Of course it doesn't. Nothing lasts, right? Everything fades, but you can't deny that those perfect moments or experiences of bliss or whatever you want to call them, they have the quality of eternity, you know, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, even though I haven't even seen that. But
well, that's funny that you raised that, because that movie attempts the opposite, because like you erase your memories completely.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just funny that you mentioned that because it's actually
But in the
refuting
end,
the idea of eternity.
But in the end, well, I don't know. I haven't even seen it, but I thought like it's Jim Carrey, right? The Jim Carrey
Right.
character gets with Kate Winslet at the end, or no?
I'm pretty sure the ending is not the romantic Romeo and Juliet vibe at all. I think it kind of, I can't remember.
Romeo
either,
and
which is
Juliet
sad,
ends with death, so
Yeah, sure. Well,
So see, I mean,
Yeah.
it could be the same thing. Whatever, even if people forgot, it's dealing with that issue of if it's forgotten, if it's not memorialized or remembered, did it ever happen? But we all know it still did happen. And speaking of memory, there is some interesting intertextuality. At one point, Hazel, who is working at the box office early in the film, that's how Caden knows
Sure.
her, right?
Mhm.
Caden comes into the theater, approaches the box office. We see what Hazel is. It's from her point of view. She's reading a book. That book is Proust.
Swan's Way.
Swan's Way. So there are a lot of moments like that. I don't know what you want to call them. Easter eggs. That's the term people use now. But they're just these fun little illusions, that give a kind of lightness or playfulness to this otherwise dark psychological horror film. Or he's reading the Daily Synecdoche, I think it's called, the local newspaper, and he says, "Oh, Harold Pinter died," and then he's like, "Oh shit, I read it wrong. He won the Nobel Prize."
Which then, as I pointed out to you, which I didn't obviously discover myself, but that's actually a spoof of an incident that happened on Sky News, where the same mistake happened to a reporter.
Some newsreader. She's not a reporter. She's a newsreader.
Yeah,
she's
okay.
an actress, basically.
She starts out by killing him and then heralding him.
She's an actor playing an actor.
It's so funny
Remember
that
that
the way
line?
Sorry, I was too concerned with me finishing off my cool story. But anyway, no, I don't remember. Is that from the movie as well?
Yeah, that's his instruction. That's his. Those are his notes to the ensemble cast. You're actors playing actors.
Yeah.
What could be more meta than that?
Right. And I don't know if we should do a quick homage to Kaveh Zahedi now and just very quickly say that the show about the show, which I really loved and which we discussed on a previous episode, is obviously very similar in terms of he's getting actors. Well, he's either playing himself or at one point, so his wife leaves him and he has to get an actress to play his wife because his wife doesn't agree to be on camera anymore. But I guess my point is all those characters, like Kaveh is more likable to me, and so I think that template for art is fascinating when you get super, super meta. Like I love that. And I've always been attracted to that hyper realism. But I like it more when it's characters who are more charismatic than Philip Seymour Hoffman, not as an actor, because obviously it's incredible, his performance, but just in terms of just the aesthetic attraction or appeal.
I'm gonna give one more example of a redeeming quality that this character has, right?
Okay, yep.
He fights to see his daughter against overwhelming odds. He insists on finding her and speaking with her. You don't find that admirable?
Yeah, and he defaces himself, right? Or degrades himself into playing out that weird role play where he has to we've already addressed it, but he has to pretend like he had a gay lover.
Falsely confess.
Right.
After his child has been brainwashed by his ex-wife or ex-partner or whatever.
No, and he clearly has aspects of idealism, and he's passionate about art. I mean, Death of a Salesman is a great play, so he starts and he's clearly invested in that play initially, and yeah, so no, I don't, and he really humbles himself at the end, right? When he dutifully becomes a cleaner, and he finds his salvation in this like very monk-like work of just right, of just cleaning. That ends up being the truth, and him taking on a female persona, and that is something that I could kind of relate to more. Like I relate more to the cleaner, I think, than I do to the tyrannical theater director. And I like him more as the cleaner.
Okay, so
yeah, I don't know.
It seems like you enjoyed it more than you're letting on, or more than you want to admit.
I didn't enjoy the experience, but I think it has a lot. Like I said, I think it's got a lot of fruit. It's got a lot of pieces of orange that we can bite and get the juice out of.
Well, I think it is definitely.
So it's a great conversation movie.
Yes, and I think it's definitely worth watching again. I think I would get even more out of it, after a second viewing and a third and so on.
But again, I do feel like it's indulgent.
Yes, sure. And I
don't feel like Charlie Kaufman is someone I want to hang with.
I'd be fascinated to interview.
Yeah, I know you would, but I just like a more. Go on.
That sounded almost derogative. I know you would.
No, that's to your credit, But I just mean that's to your credit. That's not an insult. I don't feel like I'm cool for that reaction. I think I'm just kind of simple. I just like something that's a bit more raw and.
Well, that was pretty raw. It's pretty raw.
No, it's convoluted. The film is very convoluted, right?
Okay.
And that's just that's what I mean.
You mean less intricate, simple, as you say.
Yeah, less layered.
Not raw in terms of emotion.
I just mean like less layered, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say that we've talked about the comparisons made to 8.5. I think overall I prefer 8.5 as a movie. I think 8.5 is more. I was wondering how I should describe this, and I think I want to say that 8.5 feels more organic. Like you can see how Fellini is evolving naturally from Italian neorealism and he's just kind of accidentally discovering the surreal nature of realism in 8.5. There's like a natural evolution, whereas this seems more artificial. Maybe it's got an element of that cleverness for the sake of being clever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's an element of that, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I appreciate that at times. But I think, for me personally, the way that, let's say, Fellini's brand of surrealism is more profound to me. But there can be many varieties of surrealism, many varieties of psychological horror, many varieties of the surrealist psychological thriller or drama, even though this is not a thriller. All right, I think we're running out of time here. There's so much more we could have discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I have more that we could talk about.
But see, it just ends. There's what's called an aposiopesis. He's talking. Oh, I have an idea. Die. That's it.
Right.
It's over. We're always interrupted. We never finish what we want to finish. That's maybe one of the most profound statements the film is making. All our ambitions in the end, they come to naught. We never realize our dreams or visions completely. But it's the effort. It's the effort made that's important. It's the epic ambition and intention, which is doomed to failure.
I was watching some comparison to the Sisyphus myth, and someone was arguing like for why Sisyphus is not a tragic figure. I should have paid more attention, but basically it's like.
Well, that's Camus.
I think that they were
Camus said that's.
Yeah. They were describing.
He says
Camus essay.
Sisyphus is smiling. Yeah,
on the way down, right? Or like I read that like he's got a moment where he's kind of just breaks out of the suffering when he's walking back down to go pick it up again. That's like the time where he gets his relief. But that could have been the wrong way to read it.
It could be on the way up, or whatever. He embraces and accepts his fate. Okay. So he's smiling. That's the whole point. He's not like that was meant to be a punishment, right? He's punished by the gods. He has to roll the rock up the hill every day, but eventually he sees the joy in that. Yeah. We better end it there.
Well, do you want to preview the next pod?
I don't know what the next episode is. That's going to have to be a surprise. So season 2, episode 5 of your
you've
favorite
got the power, right?
Podcast. Yeah, it's my call. I just don't know which way I'm going to go at this point. But it'll be something good. I can promise you that.
Something light and fluffy, I hope.
Probably not, but we'll see.
All right.
Okay, everyone.
Peace out, everybody.
Bye-bye.